My son-in-law stood in the doorway of the conference room like he owned it, which I suppose he believed he did. "You don't need to be in here," he said, not loudly. He had the kind of voice that didn't need volume to land hard. "This is a family matter." I looked at him, then at my daughter, who stood just behind his shoulder, eyes fixed on the carpet. "I am family," I said. He smiled. The particular smile of a man who has already decided how something ends. "We mean immediate family. The trust is in Nathan's name." "There's nothing for you to review." I was holding a manila envelope. Had been holding it since I parked the car. It wasn't thick, but it was everything. 12 years of paperwork. My accountant's signature on the last page. I pressed it a little tighter against my side and stepped into the room anyway. Nobody stopped me. They just made sure not to look at me when I sat down. "My name is Ruth. I'm 68 years old. I taught 3rd grade in the same school district for 31 years. And I have spent most of my adult life believing that if you were patient enough and quiet enough and good enough, people would eventually treat you accordingly. I no longer believe that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My husband, Gerald, died 11 years ago in March. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to funeral was 4 months. 4 months is not enough time to say everything you need to say to a person, and I spent the first 2 years afterward trying to figure out which words I'd missed. He was 61. He had plans. A fishing trip to Montana he'd been putting off for a decade. A vegetable garden he'd drawn on graph paper and never planted. 3 grandchildren he would never meet. Our daughter Natalie was 34 when her father died. She'd been married to Marcus for 6 years by then. They lived 40 minutes away, which felt close on a map and much farther on the calendar. In the beginning, after Gerald passed, they came often. Natalie would sit with me at the kitchen table and we'd go through his things slowly, carefully. Marcus would take the trash out without being asked, fix the loose gutter, replace the bulb in the hallway light that had been flickering since October. Small kindnesses. I was grateful. But grief has a shelf life for the people who don't carry it themselves. After a year, the visits thinned. After 2 years, I stopped expecting calls on weekdays. By the 3rd year, I'd learned not to call unless it was urgent, because calling and getting voicemail 3 times in a row is a loneliness I cannot describe. I had a friend named Patricia. We taught at the same school for 20 years and sat next to each other at every staff meeting from 1987 until we both retired. She brought casseroles when nobody else did. Remembered Gerald's birthday for 2 years after he was gone, which I thought was the kindest thing a person could do. Patricia never married, no children. She had a nephew out in Portland she spoke to sometimes, but mostly it was just her and the house she'd bought in 1989, and the garden she tended with more patience than most people give their families. When she got sick, I was the one who drove her to appointments. I was the one who made sure she ate. I organized her medications in the weekly pill containers she couldn't figure out, and I learned to make the chicken soup she liked, the kind with egg noodles, not rice, which she felt very strongly about. Natalie said once when I mentioned being tired, "Mom, she's not your responsibility. You're not her daughter." I didn't answer. I just put the phone down gently and sat with the words for a while. Patricia was my responsibility, the same way the people we love are always our responsibility. Because somebody has to show up. Because the alternative is that nobody does. About a year before she passed, Patricia asked me to sit with her one evening while she went through her papers. She was still sharp then. A little slower, a little more careful with her words, but sharp. She poured us each a glass of sweet tea and laid everything out on the dining room table like she was preparing for a meeting. "I've been thinking about what happens to this house," she said. I told her she had time yet. "I know I do," she said. "That's why I'm doing it now, before anybody can muddy the water." She looked at me across the table. I want you to have it, or the value of it, whatever makes more sense at the time. I told her I couldn't accept that. She said, "You can and you will, because you're the only person in my life who hasn't once made me feel like a problem to be solved." We went to her attorney the following week, a man named Harold, which I mention only because he wore the same corduroy jacket both times I met him and had the reliable quality of someone who had been doing his job long enough to stop being surprised by anything. We signed a joint estate agreement, everything witnessed and notarized. Patricia named me sole beneficiary. I didn't tell Natalie, not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't feel like her business, and because I'd learned by then that some information, shared too early, has a way of changing how people treat you. Patricia passed on a Tuesday in late October. I was there. I held her hand and told her the garden looked beautiful even though it was almost November and there was almost nothing left in it. She smiled like she knew I was lying and appreciated it anyway. I sat with her for a long time before I called anyone. Some people deserve a soft goodbye. The funeral was small. Her nephew flew in from Portland, looked uncomfortable in his suit, said the right things. Natalie and Marcus came, stood near the back, left before the reception. On the drive home, Natalie texted me, "So sorry, Mom. Let us know if you need anything." I put my phone in my purse and drove the rest of the way in silence. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Patricia's attorney's office. Formal, expected. It confirmed the transfer of her estate into my name, the house and its contents, a modest investment account, a savings account she'd been quietly contributing to for 30 years. I didn't tell Natalie immediately. I put the letter in my file cabinet, the gray metal one in the spare bedroom. And I went about my days. Tended my own garden. Finished the quilt I'd started in February. Called my book club on Thursdays. It was Marcus who found out. I don't know exactly how, whether someone mentioned it at the school where Patricia and I both used to work, whether the county property transfer showed up somewhere he could see it. But one evening in December, Natalie called, and there was a particular quality to her voice. Careful, rehearsed. "Mom," she said, "Marcus was talking to someone who mentioned Patricia's house. Is it true she left it to you?" "Yes," I said. Silence. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I'm telling you now." More silence. Then, "Marcus thinks we should talk. As a family? About what makes sense going forward. You shouldn't have to manage all of that alone." I thanked her and said I'd think about it. Then I went to the gray file cabinet, took out the letter, and read it again. Not because I'd forgotten what it said, because I wanted to be sure I remembered exactly what was mine before anyone could tell me otherwise. The meeting was Marcus's idea. He called it a family financial check-in, which was a phrase I had not heard before, and hoped never to hear again. He booked a conference room at the small business center where he rented office space, which felt like a deliberate choice. Neutral ground, he said. Professional setting. I brought the manila envelope. Natalie looked tired when I arrived. She was wearing the expression she always wore when she'd already had an argument she hadn't won, a kind of pre-apologetic exhaustion. Marcus wore a blazer and his best negotiating posture. There was a third person in the room, a man I didn't recognize, young, with a legal pad and a laptop. Marcus introduced him as a colleague who worked in estate planning. He didn't say the word attorney, but the legal pad was a hint. I set the envelope on the table. Marcus explained that he'd been looking into Patricia's estate structure on my behalf, which was a kindness I had not requested. He explained that given my age and circumstances, it might make more sense for the assets to be held in a family trust. For tax purposes, he said. For continuity. He used the word simplify 4 times in 6 minutes. I waited until he was finished. Then I said, "Which family?" He blinked. I'm sorry, you said family trust. Whose family? Patricia had no children. I have one. You are married to her. When you say family, I want to know who you mean. He smiled the way people smile when they think they're being patient. Ruth, we're all family here. Then why, I asked, is your colleague here with a legal pad? Natalie looked at the table. Marcus said the colleague was just there for guidance, just to walk through options, just in case. I opened the envelope. I have my own guidance, I said, and I laid the documents on the table slowly, one at a time, the way Patricia had done that night with the sweet tea and the dining room spread out like a meeting. The joint estate agreement, the notarized beneficiary designation, the county transfer records, a letter from my own attorney, a woman named Beverly I'd hired the week after Patricia passed, who had a direct manner I found deeply reassuring. These were executed in 2019, I said, before Patricia's diagnosis progressed, before anyone could raise questions about her mental state, witnessed by 2 people and filed with the county. The colleague with the legal pad stopped writing. I looked at Marcus. I'm not here to discuss a family trust. I'm here because my daughter asked me to come, and because I wanted you to understand that I know exactly what I own and exactly what it's worth. Marcus said there was no need to be adversarial. I said I agreed, and that the meeting was over. Natalie walked me to my car. She didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there in the parking lot with her hands in her coat pockets while the wind moved through the bare trees along the edge of the lot. He means well, she said finally. I know you believe that, I said. He's worried about you. He's worried about the house. She didn't argue. That told me enough. I drove home the long way past the elementary school where I'd taught for 3 decades. The playground was empty in the cold. Swing still. I used to watch children pump their legs on those swings and think that's what trust looks like. The willingness to let go at the highest point, because you know the seat will hold. I thought about that on the way home, about all the times I'd let go and the times I'd held on and which ones I'd gotten right. That evening I called Beverly. She picked up on the second ring, which I appreciated. I told her about the meeting, about the colleague with the legal pad, about the phrase family trust spoken in a conference room I hadn't chosen. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you want to act now or wait and see?" "Now," I said. "All right." I heard her writing something down. I'm going to recommend we formalize the transfer of the house into a revocable living trust in your name only. We'll update the beneficiary designations on Patricia's accounts and add a no contest clause to your own estate documents. If anyone challenges the arrangements, they receive nothing from anything you control. I said that sounded right. She also said gently, "Do you want Natalie included in your own estate plans?" I sat with that question for a long time, longer than she probably expected. "Not yet," I said. "Let me see who she decides to be." The next morning I was on the porch with my coffee when Marcus called. He was cordial in the way people are cordial when they are preparing to be something else. He said he hoped there were no hard feelings. I said there weren't. He said he'd been thinking, and that maybe they'd come on too strong at the meeting, and that of course my wishes were what mattered here. I thanked him. Then he said, "We were just thinking about the house in particular, Patricia's place. Since you already have your own home, it might make more sense to liquidate sooner rather than later. We'd be happy to help manage that process, take the burden off you." There it was. "Marcus," I said, "I appreciate that. But I've already spoken with my attorney. Everything is being handled." A pause. "Your attorney?" "Yes. When did you get an attorney?" When I needed one, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then I don't want this to become something that drives a wedge between you and Natalie. I don't want that either, I said. I love my daughter, but I'm not going to hand over Patricia's house to manage a wedge that someone else created. He didn't have a response to that. The call ended politely, which is sometimes how the most significant conversations end. I sat on the porch a while longer. Patricia had given me a wind chime one Christmas years ago, painted wood in copper tubes, hung it by my back door. I could hear it from the porch if it was windy enough. It was windy that morning. I listened to it and thought about her. The way she laughed too loudly at her own jokes. The way she kept every birthday card anyone ever sent her in a shoebox under her bed. The way she said once when I asked why she never seemed bitter about being alone, "Ruth, I'm not alone. I just haven't filled my house with the wrong people." 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from an attorney's office downtown. Thick envelope, good paper. The kind of stationery that costs money. It was from a firm representing Marcus. The letter used careful language. Words like questions of capacity and undue influence and relationship of dependence. It suggested that Patricia, given her health in the years prior to her death, may not have been in a position to make fully independent decisions about her estate. It requested documentation. It implied that without cooperation, they might need to seek a court order. I read the letter at the kitchen table with my reading glasses on and a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Then I called Beverly. "I've been expecting this," she said. "How bad is it, honestly?" "It's noise." They have no standing. Patricia's documents are airtight. The capacity was established. The witnesses are alive and reachable, and she had a treating physician who documented her cognitive status at the time of signing. A pause. What they're hoping is that you're intimidated, that you'll offer a settlement to make them go away. I asked her what she needed from me. She said, "Nothing you don't already have. I'm going to request Patricia's medical records from the relevant period and draft a formal response. This should be over quickly." It wasn't fast exactly, but it was methodical. Beverly filed a response within the week. She included the signed documents, the notarized estate agreement, a statement from Patricia's physician confirming her mental status in the year before her death, and a copy of a letter Patricia had written in her own hand, addressed to no one in particular. The kind of thing people write late at night when they want to get their intentions down clearly. It described her wishes, her reasoning. The language was her, fully and completely. Dry and precise, and with that particular wry edge she had when she was making a point she expected someone to push back on. The attorney on the other side went quiet for 3 weeks. Then Beverly received a notice that Marcus had withdrawn the motion. She called me on a Thursday afternoon to tell me. "It's over," she said. "The estate is yours, uncontested." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat there for a while without doing anything in particular. Outside, the dogwood in the front yard was in bloom. It had been there since before Gerald and I bought the house, planted by whoever lived there before us. And it bloomed every April, whether anyone was watching or not. I liked that about it. The complete indifference to whether it was noticed. Natalie called that evening. Her voice was different, softer. Some of the rehearsed quality was gone. "I heard from Marcus," she said, "about the motion being dropped." "Yes," I said. "Mom." A long pause. "I didn't know he was going to do that. File the motion. I want you to know that." I believed her. Mostly. "I know you and Patricia were close," she said. "I think I didn't fully understand how close until all of this happened. She was my best friend," I said. "For 25 years. Natalie was quiet. "Then, I'm sorry I said she wasn't your responsibility. That day on the phone, I've thought about it a lot." "I know you have," I said. "Is there anything I can do?" "I thought about that. Come for dinner. Not with Marcus, just you. She came the following Sunday. She brought a bottle of wine she knew I liked and didn't mention the estate once. We talked about her kids, about the book I was reading, about a trip she wanted to take to see the coast. She helped with the dishes and stayed until after dark. Before she left, she stood in the doorway and said, "I'm going to try to do better." "I know," I said. "So am I." After she left, I went to the spare bedroom and pulled out the box where I keep the things that matter. The letters Gerald sent me when we were dating. Photographs. A small notebook where I've written down things people said to me that I wanted to keep. I found one from Patricia, written on a note card she'd slipped into my mailbox some years ago, back when we were both still working. "You give too much to people who have not earned it," she'd written. "One day you'll figure out that's a choice, not a character flaw. When you do, it'll change everything." I'd tucked the card into the box and half forgotten it. Now I read it again and felt the truth of it settle somewhere in my chest. Not painful, just present. I took out my own notepad and started writing. Not a will, not yet, but the beginning of one. I wrote Beverly's name at the top of the page. Then Patricia's house on Clement Street, the address I now held the deed to. Then Natalie's name, with a question mark I didn't cross out. Then I wrote the name of a young woman named Grace. She was 24, worked at the public library 2 towns over, had been stopping by to check on me since Gerald's funeral, which her grandmother, a woman from my church, had asked her to do once, and which Grace had never stopped doing. She came every couple of weeks. She borrowed books and always returned them. She asked about my garden in a way that made it clear she was genuinely interested in whether things were growing. She had never asked me for a single thing. I wrote her name on the page and drew a line underneath it. I called Beverly the next morning. "I want to establish a trust," I said, "not just for the estate, for the future. And I want to name someone other than Natalie as the primary beneficiary." Beverly said, "Tell me about her." I told her about Grace, about the library, about the borrowed books, about the fact that she showed up to a funeral for a man she'd never met because someone asked her to, and then kept showing up for 11 years without being asked again. Beverly said, "She sounds like the right person." I said I thought so too. "And Natalie?" "A smaller portion," I said. "Conditional. If she doesn't contest the arrangement, she receives it. If she does, she doesn't. A no-contest clause." "Yes." We worked through the details over 2 more calls. Beverly drafted the language carefully, and I read every paragraph. I asked questions. I changed 3 things. By the end of the month, the documents were signed, witnessed, and filed. I told Grace about the trust when she came by in late April. She'd brought tomato seedlings from her grandmother's garden, the kind you plant in May. We were kneeling in the backyard, pressing them into the raised bed Gerald had built in 2006, when I told her. She sat back on her heels, looked at me. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "That's the point. Why me?" I thought about what Patricia had written on that note card, about choice and character and what it means to finally stop giving to people who haven't earned it and start giving to the ones who have. "Because you come," I said, "because you've come for 11 years without being asked, and you've never once made me feel like a problem." She was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down properly in the dirt, which surprised me. Most people in that moment would stand, adjust, find something to do with their hands, but Grace just sat. "Patricia sounds like she was wonderful," she said. "She was," I said. "You would have liked her." "I think I already do," she said, "from everything you've told me." We planted the tomatoes in silence for a while. The sun was low and the yard smelled like turned earth. At some point I realized I was entirely calm, not numb, not resigned, just still in the way that a room feels still when all the right things are finally in their right places. Marcus never called again. Whether Natalie spoke to him about it or whether he simply decided the effort wasn't worth the return, I don't know. Some things you don't need to understand. They just stop and you let them. Natalie came back for dinner twice more in the spring. She met Grace once, briefly, on an afternoon when they happened to overlap, and she was gracious about it in a way that cost her something. I noticed. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. There is a version of this story where I explain that I've forgiven everyone and the family is healed and everything is as it was. But that version would be false, and I have no interest in false versions anymore. What's true is that my daughter and I are rebuilding something, slowly, on different terms than before, and that Grace now has a stake in a future that I intend to make as solid as possible before I'm not here to protect it. What's also true is that Patricia was right about all of it. One evening I found the nota card again, read it again. Then I wrote something underneath her words, in my own handwriting in pen, not for anyone else. Just because I wanted the two parts of the thought to live together on the same page. One day you'll figure out that's a choice. And beneath it, in my hand, I figured it out. I put the card back in the box, closed the lid, and went to water the tomatoes. They were already reaching for the light. I've been thinking about Patricia's nota card a lot lately. The one she slipped into my mailbox years ago, the one I tucked away and half forgot. You give too much to people who have not earned it. One day you'll figure out that's a choice, not a character flaw. She was right. She was right about that the way she was right about most things, quietly, without needing to make a production of it. What happened with my daughter's husband wasn't a surprise, not really. People who reach for things that don't belong to them rarely announce themselves in advance. They use soft words, words like simplify and family and burden, and if you aren't paying attention, those words can sound like kindness. For a long time, I was the kind of person who wasn't paying attention. Not because I was foolish, because I had spent decades believing that good behavior was its own protection, that if I gave enough, forgave enough, stayed quiet enough, the people around me would eventually reflect that goodness back. That's not how it works. What I've learned, what this whole experience forced me to finally understand, is that how people treat you is rarely about your goodness. It's about what they've decided you're worth, and whether they believe you'll speak up if they're wrong. Marcus had decided I was the kind of woman who would nod and sign and be grateful for the help. He wasn't inventing that version of me. He'd watched me for years, and that's the version I'd given him. That's the part that stays with me. Not his behavior. His behavior was his. But the years I spent making myself easier to overlook. Patricia never did that. She was clear-eyed in a way that I used to mistake for coldness and eventually understood was just honesty. She kept her affairs in order, not because she was suspicious of people, but because she respected herself enough to prepare. She hired a good attorney when she was still well. She wrote down her wishes while her handwriting was still firm. She didn't wait for someone to tell her the right time. That kind of clear thinking, knowing what you have, knowing what you want, writing it down and making it legal, that's not just practical. It's an act of self-respect. It's the quiet way a person says, my life has value, and I intend to treat it accordingly. And then there's what it takes to actually hold the line when someone pushes back. Because Marcus did push back. He hired a firm, used careful language, implied that Patricia hadn't been in her right mind. I won't pretend that letter didn't land hard. It did. It landed hard because it was an attack on her memory, on the choices she made while she was fully herself. And there was a moment, sitting at that kitchen table with the envelope open in front of me, when the old instinct rose up. The one that says, just make it easier, just give a little, Just keep the peace. I called Beverly instead. That decision, to call my attorney instead of offering a settlement, to hold what was mine instead of handing it over to quiet the noise, that was the decision that changed things. Not the paperwork. The decision behind it. Grace comes by every couple of weeks still. The tomatoes she helped me plant are doing well. We don't talk about any of this much. We talk about books and the garden and whatever small, ordinary things are happening in the neighborhood. But every time she leaves, I feel the same thing. I felt the afternoon I told her about the trust. A kind of stillness. The feeling of a room where everything is finally where it belongs. I'm not angry at Natalie. I'm watching her, the way you watch a plant that went a long time without water, carefully, without expectation, hoping. And I'm finished apologizing for knowing what I'm worth.